What's happening, good people? Thank you again for tuning in for this Tuesday breakdown with the elder from Greenville, who's stationed in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina right now as the assistant pastor at Hibben. Is it Hibben or Hibbins?
Hibben.
Hibben. I've been saying Hibbins. Hibben United Methodist Church today. And so we're going to have this conversation about navigating a cross-racial appointment. I'm not sure, maybe a touchy subject for some, but I think it's a needed conversation with what's happening in today's society. So sit back, relax, throw on your headgear, as they say back in the 80s. We're going to take you for a trip through the atmosphere. You don't need a spaceship or just a microphone. So please, if you have any questions, comments, please send them. Please like, share as we move forward in this conversation. And I'm going to let Walter kind of introduce himself. You all know he's been here before as on our Thursdays as we do pull up and chop, and as we've been talking about Audre Lorde. And this Thursday we will be talking about Toni Morrison's The Origin of the Others. We're starting that text this week, but I'll let him say give you some intimate details about, kind of what we're going to talk about, and then we'll get into the conversation. So Walter, share with the people your call story, as they call it, and how you got to Hibbins. That kind of add into the fact, and I'll say more about this and ask you a question about how did education kind of impact or make it easier for you to move into a cross-racial appointment, if it did?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Greenville, and God blessed me with a little bit of intelligence. I ended up in some honors and advanced classes, and I found myself often the only definitely the only African American male, and often the only a person of African descent in the class. So that kind of set me on a certain path, if you will. And then as Toni, my wife and I'm married and have two daughters, we began to so numerous things happened, but we began to look for a church, and we decided to visit Shandon in Columbia one day, and we knew it was a predominantly Anglo church, white church, but we went in and were treated really nice and welcomed, and the girls liked the Sunday school, and so we decided to become members of Hibben United Methodist Church, and we were members there for 8 years. And this was when I was still in education, prior to me answering the call to ministry, and then went off to did answer that call, and again, that's a whole story by itself. But then went over to Lutheran Southern Seminary in Columbia, and went through the whole process and became a certified candidate, became provisional elder, and we're working towards provisional elder while still a student in seminary. And I believe it was talking with the two district superintendents that talked to every student as you're going through. They mentioned the fact that I was a member of Shandon, that I came out of Shandon is where I answered my call. So I'm considered a son of Shandon, if you will. And that kind of led them to ask if I would be interested in a cross-cultural appointment. And I said, sure, I would be interested in that. But my first appointment was actually to a African-American church in Aiken. And then the second appointment brought me to Hibben, where I've been for the associate pastor, as you mentioned, for 6 years. Well, it'll be 6 years in the end of June.
Yeah. So go ahead.
But I guess what you were asking, I think you were asking more about the educational, me as an educator as opposed to my educational experience. But that did play, I guess, some role in the ways I've been able to, as you say, navigate the cross-racial appointment.
Right. And for to be candid, we had a conversation about the use of navigating, because that word navigating can come off a little off-putting if we don't explain it, or if I don't explain it. But that was my choice of a word, using that word, because we both have been in cross-racial appointments. Now, I probably will never do it again, because my experience was horrible, and I think that was part of the conversation that we've had, numerous of times, about what does it mean to be Black men, Black women going into cross-racial white appointments and living out authentically who you are, because that becomes difficult every Sunday, every day, because what does that? I know what it looked like for me. It was hard. It was hard, because I'm 6'3", 275, and I'm loud, I'm brash, and I'm in your face, and so when I entered into the space, it was intimidating for the white parishioners at this particular church. And I came to visit you one Sunday, and your people were a little different than where I was. And not saying that everybody at that church was evil, right, but I had some bad episodes at the church that I was at. I had some good times too, but I had some bad times too. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think to start, it's troubling to me that we even have to talk about a cross-racial, cross-cultural appointment. I don't think there should be a thing. If we're all believing in the same God, serving the same, particularly as Christians, believe in Jesus Christ, then there shouldn't be a Black church and a white church. But we know, if you know anything about the history of this country, then you know why that is. And so, starting from that point, that my whole understanding, not whole, but one of the primary things that I hope the people of Hibben have heard is that I hope, my sincere hope and prayer is that one day there's no such thing as a cross-racial appointment, that the churches are so that you won't be able to look at a church and tell whether it's Black or white. We get to the point where we just worship together, and because growing up in Greenville, I went to numerous churches, and there was a church, well, I won't call a name, but there was a church, a specific Baptist church in Greenville that I would visit on a regular basis, that was very contemplative, if you will. That was, you didn't clap your hands.
Right,
you didn't clap
right.
to a song at this church. The usher would come by and tell you, oh, no, we don't do that. You don't clap here. So to say that that's white or Black is, can be trouble, kind of problematic, if you will. So what I'm saying is there may be a certain type of church, a church that's more lively, if you will, or more contemplative, more traditional, stoic kind of churches, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a certain race in that church. And the other thing that I would say is that, particularly for the United Methodist Church, we claim that we have what's called open itinerancy. We're not, unlike some denominations, we're appointed by the bishop and his or her cabinet. We're not called, we're appointed. So if we're appointed, in theory at least, with open itinerancy, I'm supposed to be able to be appointed to any church in the South Carolina Conference. But we know that there are churches in the South Carolina Conference that if I was appointed particularly as the senior pastor, that would not go over well. That would not be accepted. And so the question I have to ask with cross-racial appointments, or not even a question, but what is the purpose? What is the point that we are trying to make, or what is the objective in doing cross-racial appointments? If we're only sending cross-racial appointments to churches that will receive them, then what's the achievement? What's the actual goal? And I know there's no answer. I mean, we don't have an answer between the two of us, but I think that's something we have to wrestle with, particularly as a denomination, as the United Methodist Church, is what is the usefulness of cross-racial appointments if you can only send them to places where you know they'll be received?
Isn't that counterproductive though, if I'm sending an appointment to a church that does not want them?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I see why. I understand why it's not done. I mean, that would be harmful to both the pastor and to the congregation. I understand. So, but if you're, and I don't want to play like a parent-child relationship, but if your child doesn't want to do something that is beneficial to that child, you still find a way to get that child to do that thing.
well, and I'm not so much talking about for the appointment. Now, for the clergy member, I'm saying as a leader, why would a leader appoint a clergy member to a church in Pillion, where we know that if folks don't know, I grew up in Lexington County. In certain parts of Lexington County, it was more prone for Klan members to be, Klan parties to be, more racism was in these particular areas. So if I'm privy to that type of information, why would I, as a leader, then send a clergy member to a cross-racial cultural, I think you use that term, cultural appointment, right, knowing that I'm setting them up for something that could be detrimental? And
again, I wouldn't. I'm not suggesting that we do that. However, right. What I am suggesting is something that was brought to my attention in seminary was that we ought to be, as the leaders, if I am assigned to a church, and let's say, for example, I know that there are plans, even if I don't know, but again, if we have open itinerancy, and I know that a woman could be following me, for example, I should be teaching and leading in such a way that my congregation is ready to accept a woman as pastor. And so what I would suggest, and again, I'm not trying to be, not trying to throw mud on anybody, but in the example that you're using, it's apparently okay to continue to be racist in these congregations and say, we're not ever going to take a person of African descent. And the leaders, the pastors and the church leaders are okay with that, or at least are silent on it and are not teaching in a way that challenges that or that removes it. Again, I use the sexism as another example. I mean, it would be to me malpractice for me not to include lay women in the worship service, to show or to have them up front and showing that women can lead, so that if they do receive a woman pastor, this congregation is ready to receive.
And I know Martin, big ups to Martin. Martin is also one of the other brothers on Pull Up and Chop. He asked this question, and I want to add to this. He says, and why aren't we sending white pastors to African American churches? I think we talked about this earlier, is that looks a little different in the culture, in these cross-racial cultural appointments, because I'm not sure exactly what that looks like for them as opposed to us, because I see it, and I'm not a white man or woman going to a black congregation, but I know black folk. Black folks are a little bit more receiving and accepting, to a degree, of folk coming into their space, as we see what happened at Mother Emanuel when the white boy came in there and murdered the 9 people at a Bible study. So what to answer Martin's question? Well, what is your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think you said you made the key point there. Coming into our space, do we have space? And the history of this country suggests that, and you made a key point that, Ruth, whatever his name, was able to didn't have any hesitation, didn't feel any kind of there was nothing preventing him, no barrier for him to come into Mother Emanuel. And if you look at the history of this country, segregation is one way. Like, what Black folks, people of African descent, you can't go into the white area, but white folks could easily come into the Black area anytime they wanted to. They called it slumming.
Yeah.
So
let me say that point again. Say that, because I have never even considered that point. Segregation was one way.
That's Howard Thurman. That's not me. But segregation is one way. Yeah, it's the white folks are free to go anywhere in this country they want to. There is no barriers. There's nothing to stop them from coming to the Black areas of Black communities, other than after everything's been taken out of it. Now the only thing that's left is crime and drugs, and there's no reason for them to go. But again, you think about certain certain movies and stuff in the 80s or whatever. They went to the Black neighborhoods to go buy the drugs and then go back over to the suburbs to do them. I mean, right. It's that kind of idea. But I'm not driving up to into too fancy of a white neighborhood and just think I'm just going to do whatever I want to and feel free in that. I better be on my P's and Q's and be aware if an officer gets behind me or whatever, they're going to question why am I in that space. So to answer, I think you answer the question when you say our space. What is our space? What is the space that we actually have that is off limits to white folks? And my answer would be there is none.
I like Kelly Brown Douglas in her text. She says she refers to it as the cherished space. That anytime Black folks move into a cherished space of whiteness, then we can expect to be put in a place where we will have to either defend ourselves or we will be going to a funeral or getting somebody out of jail. Now, those are my words, not hers. But her thoughts are around similar to what you were saying, because we really don't have a space like that. We thought that the church, the barbershop, and the funeral homes were our spaces, but we have found that those spaces are not safe anymore as well. Right. And so Martin followed up with questions. Why can't white churches use the same excuse? And I guess that is, kind of the answer to his previous question.
What same excuse? That they don't have to have Black? Well, so it's not, again, if you've got all the space and I'm supposed to be part of your denomination or we believe. So again, well, let me back up. Just foundational Christian theology says that there shouldn't be opposite spaces. Again, like I said previously, I think the whole idea of a cross-racial, cross-cultural appointment, the reason why I think it's good we have them. I think it's bad that we have to have them.
Right. I see what you're
saying. So I guess to answer the question, there really shouldn't be a reason. We shouldn't even be having the conversation, in my opinion, if we're true Christians and we're all serving the same God. It should just be, I'm a full elder in the United Methodist Church based on my gifts and talents that I put on the profile that the bishop and the cabinet has before them. This church matches my gifts and talents. This is a good match. They are mission minded, or they want whatever it is that I have as a pastor that I can offer. It shouldn't. That should be it. That should be the end of the conversation. We found a pastor with the gifts and talents that meet the needs of this. And on top of that, what we do, what we say as United Methodists, we're not appointed to congregations. We're appointed to communities. So there are churches that we know are now, the community around those churches have changed. So if that pastor is appointed not to just the church, but to the community that surrounds it, we're doing a disservice to a lot of the communities that we say we're serving as United Methodists, because those people don't look like the people in the building.
Now, now I didn't know that part about. I guess that's out of your book of discipline. What you just
I don't know if it's book, but it's that's what.
But
yeah, when you said, I mean, at the end of this, but that's what's when we're talking about appointment system. We're not talking about, you're not appointed to the you don't just take care of the congregation. You're appointed to the community, right? That's where you're appointed to.
Right.
Because you may have you may be on a charge with more than one congregation, for example. Too,
right.
But my point being, then, if that's what we're saying, then we're not even living up to that much. We're not really even serving the communities that we say we're going to serve under the appointment system because of race. It's plain and simple. That this congregation surrounded by this race of people who are not in the community is not what it was when the church was founded. Now doesn't want to serve the community, and they want leaders and pastors who are coming in and will say, well, I'm only serving you, and we're good here.
I think you stumped me on that one. I have to recollect myself, because that is pretty much, that should be the call of all churches, but be so inwardly focused, or many of the pastors that I've seen and many of the churches are so inwardly focused that they refuse, or I'll use that word, they refuse to really go outside the church and look at the community and say, okay, what can we use? How can we use our resources to move outside of the church? Because if we do what you're saying, then this whole notion of cross-racial or cultural appointments would then be out the door.
Yeah.
But here's my other thing. In the seasons, in the climate that we're in, more is a better word. What does that look like? Because we're in the midst of, and I'm not talking about COVID, I'm talking about, racism. Not that it's just came on the scene, but with what happened with George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and we can go down the list, but those three really hit home during this pandemic. What does that look like in a cross-racial appointment when the community is speaking louder than the church?
Man, well, so I don't know how you want me to deal with that, but I'll say, so then for those of us who actually get the opportunity to serve a cross-racial appointment, I think that is the big opportunity. That's where it can, I think that's where it does serve a purpose and does have some meaning. But I think sometimes that happens, I don't want to say despite, but it's not as intentional as it could be. For example, I know I don't think the bishop and the cabinet were planning on me to come to Hibben, Mount Pleasant, the Charleston area, in June of 2015. And as they were making that decision, the fellow would do what he did at Mother Emanuel.
Okay, right.
I got here, when I got to got here. We were unloading boxes watching the President Obama at the funeral, singing Amazing Grace. And I just kind of, well, not really, I mean, jokingly, but kind of trying to wrap my head around the fact that, okay, here I am serving an Anglo church, European church, in the midst of all this happening.
Yep.
And, and I'm getting ready to preach my first sermon, or maybe second. No, first, I think it was my first sermon following these events. So what do I do? What do you do with that? And I think that goes back to your title, and and you kind of wrestle with it, but it is a navigation in some ways. The more I think about it, because I'm trying to navigate being I mean, I do think there is something to being the pastor to the congregation, but there's also being the priest or prophet to the congregation about what's happening in the community. So that creates that kind of that tension. How much do I challenge this congregation to move beyond their comfort zone, and how much am I there to encourage and to say, okay, I see where you are, and this is how I can help you as much as I can help you in that way to move forward and be better, or to serve a pastoral role. I mean, because you are there. I mean, you're one of the things that I learned over the time, and it's true of black or white folks, but if we're talking cross-racial, one way that you definitely get closer to your congregants, and one way that breaks down a lot of barriers, is let someone get sick, or even let someone die, and you're there talking with those folks and being with them at those times. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter that I'm an African descent. It really is now I'm Pastor Walter, and they're glad I'm there. And that I saw that happen with folks who said some things to me, or that were questionable at best, and we had to have some conversation around. But when they got sick, or someone they loved got sick, or even, like I said, even died, then that kind of changed the relationship in many ways.
Right. Yeah. Martin says, he said he almost, and he's talking about Dylan Roof, that is, he said he almost changed his way because the people were so nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Man.
Yeah.
And he said they aren't ready for, and I think that was more to the comment previously about why can't white churches use the same excuse. That was to your comment. Brandon Hevner, big up Brandon, said, and not just the UMC. And he's talking about, you're not just a pastor to the United Methodist Church and the community. You're a pastor to everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can
What's
say,
up, Brandon?
So I can say this as well. As I said, and like I said, we've talked about this a couple of times, more than a couple of times. I can remember giving communion at the church where I was, and let me preface this first. I can remember having conversations with you and Martin, and Martin said something. Martin said, man, you in this so much, this thing probably won't hit you till probably 3 or 4 years later of how hard it was, because you're in it and you're doing the work. And that was true. It's not until now where I feel the effects of what was said and done, because I don't have that demeanor of you. Because if you say something to me, my thought is I'm going to come back at you and we'll pray about it later. You know, my thought on forgiveness is you probably have to forgive me quicker than I'm going to forgive you. and that's just, and I'm honest about it, because there were some things that were said. You know, I was called the N word.
Right.
And I said, if someone says it to my face, you know, it's going to be a lot of slow singing and flower bringing, in the words of the notorious B.I.G. Now, did I mean that's literally? I don't know. But there would have been some furniture moving. But it was said to me through some other folks. And I took this stuff and I told my wife she couldn't come back. My wife didn't come like the last 6 months I was there. I was only there a year. But I do remember communion. And this is what got my attention. You know, when we were served communion, folks would actually leave my line, because, you know, we was at a Lutheran church, and, you know, you actually served the communion. They would leave my communion line and go to the other line. And so one day, my wife and I, both of us got up there, and both of us served communion, and folks didn't take the communion. And, you know, that's serious in the Lutheran church. That's more important than preaching, you know. And they left, sat down, and some of them just actually went home. Didn't take communion that day because they did not want to receive communion from a Black individual, you know. And so these are some deeply, deeply theological issues that are tied to race. And that right there alone said to me, I wouldn't do this again. It would take God and 3 talking donkeys and 18 burning bushes for me to do that again.
18?
18, maybe even 20. because afterwards you realize, you know, this is the church. Mm-hmm. This is the thing where we're supposed to find peace and solace, but yet this is one of the most racist institutions and the most harsh institutions on the face of the earth. Yeah. But you know, I hear you, and we've had these conversations before, and I applaud you because you know how you approach it is so different than how I approach it. But and I wonder, is some of this because of your ability to process history differently than how I process history? Because I'm not a history major. I'm more of a art, theology, music type of guy. Versus you look at it from a historical standpoint, and you put all that data together. And this is just me trying to, you know, figure out and rationalize it, for lack of a better term.
I think, well, that may, I think historically I could look at it and say I'm doing something that, or God is doing something through me that you know motivates me to stick with it. But I think you said something. You said this is the church, and this is not supposed to be. This is not the way it's supposed to be. Based, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the reason why I stay. That's the reason why you can't get rid of me, because I recognize, and that's not it's not about right or wrong so much, but I recognize that that's not right. That this is, you know, I'm standing on the word of God itself. I'm standing on what actually is. And if you choose not to take communion, if you choose to disconnect yourself from that, what we call in the United Methodist Church a means of grace, then that's on you. That's your doing. And I think if I walk away, I mean, you know, so that we have had this conversation numerous times, and what I've said to you over and again is, I believe in engagement. Now, I've learned in this time that sometimes engagement just isn't possible if the other person is just not, or other group of people just doesn't want to. to engage that. And I've finally, I think, gotten that through my head. But I know from experience, there have been people who have said, being able to talk to you one-on-one, face-to-face, has changed the way I think about race. I mean, and that's more than one person. And again, I'm not setting out, that's not my, I that's too big for me to try to carry to one person at a time, change everybody's idea about race. But what I'm saying is that, and it may not necessarily take that, it may just take someone seeing a person of African descent leading worship in order to say, I didn't, I never considered that or whatever. I didn't think that was possible. And I'll share a quick story to kind of, if that's all right, to kind of illustrate what I'm trying to say. So I'm a little bit ashamed to say I was not aware of Jim Wallace's book, America's Original Sin, when it first came out.
Mm-hmm.
I missed it. So, but I did a Bible study for my ordination process on the Gospel according to Luke, and talked about Jesus saying that in Luke 4, and I'm gonna butcher it again, but proclaiming the year of Jubilee and the freeing of the captives. And someone at the close of that Bible study, the last session, someone suggested that we should look at Jim Wallace's book, America's Original Sin, because this would tie into, they thought, dealing with marginalized and people who have been shut out of the American, quote unquote, American dream, and the racism that has affected the church. And I said, sure, because I had no idea what the book, I didn't know anything about the book. I said, sure. But even before it could be advertised in the bulletin, a group of folks got together, called the chair of SPRC, called the senior pastor, and told it on me that I was trying to stir up racial unrest and trouble. And I had to sit down with the senior pastor and the chair of SPRC and say, they got it all wrong. It wasn't my suggestion to do this book. It wasn't my suggestion at all to continue this study. But my question then was, but what if it was my suggestion? Aren't I, as a provisional elder at the time, aren't I authorized to come up with Bible studies? And if you don't want to do it, that's fine. No, you don't have to attend. But why would you then attempt to stop that study from happening? So anyway, and we ended up having to advertise it as two lay people wanting to discuss. They could. Really? We didn't advertise it as Pastor Walter leading this study. We advertised it as these other two lay people inviting you to this study led by Pastor Walter. Anyway, so we did have the study. My point that I was getting to is there was a gentleman in the study who said he came skeptical about the whole, the role of the church in racism and all that. And at the end of the study, he said, if I hadn't sat through this study, I would still be ignorant of stuff. And, since that time, me and him were, not like best buddies, but it totally changed our relationship.
Well, that there's a cost with that. And I think you have to be willing to pay that cost. My advisor, Dr. Stephen Ray, he said this one day to me, and I've shared this story with you, and I share with others. I was looking out the window. I was doing an independent study with him, and I was angry. I was mad, man. I was highly upset. For some reason, I don't even remember exactly what it was, but something racial had happened, and I was mad. And he said, Brian, I remember when I think it was Trayvon Martin, one of those young kids had, been shot or killed. And he says a whole bunch of white students got outside on this main road in front of Garrett, and they blocked the street. And I went out there with him. And he says, man, I was so excited and proud that they went out there. And he said, sometime you have, well, he said it like this, excuse me. He says, I am building and teaching these young kids because later they'll go back home and teach their parents and their friends. And he says, and he didn't necessarily use the term allies, but I believe he did. And he says, I'm building allies. He says, because we can't win this fight by ourselves. It stuck with me because, that is always, I've because of what I have endured in my life and been through, I was skeptical of any type of, white allyship because I didn't think it would sustain.
Right.
But when he said that, he says, we can't win the fight by ourselves. And as I've been reading Black Power and the American Myth, and C.T. Vivian says something similar 50 years ago. And so what we're seeing is, even though I may have my particular issues with cross-racial appointments, and I would never do it, like I said, it'd take God and the whole host of angels. I applaud you and all others who do it, because I think that it is such a way that you have to nuance and engineer and do things that it is strenuous. Even in the way that you preach, you have to do things. It makes you a better preacher when you leave because you've learned how to write sermons and preach in a way that everybody gets what you're saying, because, I could say things like the way I started this thing off, I'm not sure if everybody would get that, but folk who grew up in hip hop, they get it. Right. But when you're preaching, you can't do that all the time in certain contexts because, that's going to go over folks' head. And, right. I may have to use I start a lot of my sermons off with songs, so I can't use Anita Baker in a congregation where folk like, who is Anita Baker? I might have to use somebody else because that just doesn't flow in that context. You know what I mean? So when you're talking about these cross-racial appointments, you have to learn yourself, and it becomes a place where you're constantly being stretched on a regular basis. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, I mean, I couldn't do it. I just, man. And I just can't, man. Even me thinking about it, man. I mean, it was some great things that were done there. Right. As we, the many days that we talk and we continually talk. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I think that's where my educational experience comes through too, because I had an education professor at the University of South Carolina that said that people aren't leaving the good kids at home. They're sending what they got, and that I kind of apply that to church. People that come to church, they're doing, I want to believe, the best that they can where they are at the moment. Now that's not the best they can. Don't misunderstand.
Yeah. I was gonna have some questions. So I'm gonna ask some questions now.
That is the best they can. At least they believe they're doing the best that they can. So as a teacher, preacher, it is part of my responsibility as a pastor to then challenge, to then instruct and challenge in some ways. And that's not always received well, just like it wasn't received well with students. Why don't you just leave me alone? All I wanted to see. Won't you leave me alone? All I want to do is go to heaven. So it's that same kind of mentality to me that, but I, not that I see so much, but I know what the gospel says in this case. I mean, when in the classroom, I saw this in the student, I'm like, we need to bring this out. In this setting, God says that we can do, Jesus says, you're going to do even greater works than what I did. Now, Jesus healed the sick, raised the dead, all these things that Jesus did. For us just to sit back and wait to go to heaven, that just seems like a waste of the gifts that God has given us. And so even particularly in a cross-racial appointment or a cross-cultural appointment, to be able to draw out people from places that they think that they can't do. That'll be uncomfortable for me. I can't hang around those types of people, and they don't say it in this way, but
Right.
it is that feeling of, well, I'll just do the things that I'm comfortable doing. I like singing in the choir. I like doing it, and nothing's wrong with that. But stretch yourself, stretch yourself. And yeah, you're right. I'm stretched trying to help folks to be more than what they think they can be.
Right. Big ups to Diana.
Yeah, hey, Reverend Diana.
I think you're still in Canada, I believe. So big ups to you, and then we have that resident Strawther that seems to pop up in here on a regular basis. I don't know who she is, but hello to her too. Yes, and Diana says she is still in Canada. Yeah. So let me ask you this. You know how I feel about this. I'll never do it again. I'll never. Would you do a cross-racial appointment? Well, let me before you answer that question. This is one thing, and this is, I don't know if you want to answer this because you might out yourself. but this is real for me. And I think you addressed it earlier, and we're gonna go a little longer than we usually do. But when I first went through the process of being at a cross-cultural appointment, especially when you're talking about Mother Emanuel and what was happening in the country, I felt like I was letting the Black community down because I was taking my gifts and talents over here when I could have been using them in the Black community. Did you feel like that? I know that's what, and I know you share some of that, but I really felt like I'm leaving my people out here in the cold, and when I could take my gifts and talents over here and use them in this particular church.
Well, some of that is, again, it's out of my control because, again, we're appointed, not called. So
right.
I just agreed to go wherever I'm sent. Now, they did ask, would you serve? And I guess I could have said no. And in that case, I would have been in a African American church. I didn't feel that. I have never, like, that didn't enter my train of thought, but I have heard it's been said to me by others that I need to be in an African, that, you're too talented to be. And again, I'm not trying to brag about myself in any way, shape, or form, but that, that I was needed.
Right.
This was said to me by other colleagues, that you're needed in the African American church. And I have, when asked, gone and preached or, tried. I was, when we were doing it, we had a Fifth Sunday event among the African American churches in the Charleston area. And I would go, even though I was serving Hibben, I would go and the other congregations would be there, but and it's weird. So we have what's called the Summit of the Black Church too, that regularly, and I would sign up and go, but then I'd feel like almost like an outsider, even though I am African American, because I was serving an Anglo church, and the issues, the workshops, and the things that were there were specific to African American churches, the things that they're having to deal with from a more racial point of view. So but that's kind of the story of my life. Again, I have felt at times like a man without a country because, like I said, I would get on, well, I didn't say it, but my education experience, I'd get on the bus and ride to school with a bus full of African Americans. I get to school and outside of homeroom, my classes, I'm the only Black male, definitely in the class, and often the only African descent in the classroom. So, when I'm riding back home on the bus, because I have white friends in school, Black folks are saying, you're not Black enough. And then of course, certain white folks would say that of course I'm not white. So in many instances throughout my life, I've kind of felt some of that, but that's just personal stuff.
Well, I can tell you what, when I look at the screen, you look Black to me. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I ask this final question, and then I ask my consistent question. And if you fail to answer this question, you will never be able to be allowed back on this platform ever again. But my first question is, make that face. My first question is this: would you ever do another cross-racial appointment?
Without a doubt, yes.
Without a doubt.
With no hesitation. Yes.
Brian, would you ever do a cross-racial appointment?
No. Brian, would you?
No. Man, I couldn't. God, no. Mm-mm.
God lining up those 20 burning bushes for you right now.
Look, it would take that. Take that. That ain't. I just. I don't know if I will last long. First thing come out my mouth be James Baldwin, James Cone, and Marcus Garvey or something.
Hey. And that's, that you say, but that's and God laughs. That's right, Reverend Diana. That is right. And God is having a good time with Brian right now. No. But that is something that I kind of, I didn't. You were talking about the having to know who you are and having to know who your congregation is and preaching to them. But over time, if you introduce folks, so now my congregation, particularly folks who've heard me preach, know who Howard Thurman is, know Jesus and the Disinherited, because I basically, over the course of these 6 years, preached the whole book of Jesus and the Disinherited and Howard Thurman to these folks.
Well, so. We're running out of time, and I don't want to keep everybody here, but I'm gonna tell you something. Everybody, I hear what y'all all saying. Brandon, Martin, everybody, y'all all got little jokes, and we're all laughing. But I'm gonna tell you.
Oh,
this is it took me until probably this year where it hit me how hard it was. And knowing how, when I tell you my wife can't, I went to this church, my mother said, you don't need to take Sania. Sania is my youngest daughter. You don't need to take Sania there because she thought something was going to happen to her. Mm-hmm. When, and living with that. And we're talking about to the church.
Right.
And so I live with that on a daily basis. When I went to the church one day and it was cops outside and I stayed an extra hour because I knew if I walked out of that door and those cops were sitting out there, they were going to take me to jail because they're going to say, why are you in this church? And so I stayed until they left. And it's just dealing with those type of issues. I just don't want to deal with.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You're fine.
Well, I was going to say, that's what I kind of hinted at it earlier, talking about being intentional. I think the problem is, and I can't speak, I'm not going to pretend to speak for the Lutheran Church. And I hope I'm not sounding too critical of the United Methodist Church either, because I do think it's wonderful, the number of cross-racial, cross-cultural appointments that are. And I think that is a good thing. Don't misunderstand me. But I do still think, yes, it's good we have them, but it's bad that we have to have them. But I would say part of the problem, I think, or one of the things that would alleviate some of what you're talking about is being intentional in preparing congregations for this appointment. And so the previous pastor or leadership team should do that. But I do think, particularly we have districts, so particularly for districts, we could do something around, particularly if even if it's cross-racial, cross-cultural, or if it happens to be the first woman pastor, whatever. And hopefully there aren't any that are getting their first woman pastor in 2021, but it's possible. But do some serious training with congregations, with the leadership, to model the behavior that the others then would follow. So, and to prepare pastors.
But Walter,
Nope.
here I'll tell you why I agree with you. But the issue isn't so much the preparation. The issue is you have to deconstruct so many levels of theology that, especially in your itinerant system, you don't have the time to. Now, in a Baptist church or in a Lutheran church or in a Presbyterian church where you're not being moved so much, you can say, okay, I'm gonna give myself 15 years or not, maybe 6 years to deconstruct that theology, because the issue is a theological issue. See, I can, if you're really telling me you're serious about your faith, then theologically, I can take my time with you. But the problem is, folks, how many folks are really serious about their faith enough to where you can deal with them from a racial, or sexual, or sexist, or homophobic, all these type of issues? My thing is race. It takes time to deal with people and from a racial standpoint, and that's in the black and the white church, because black folk ain't talking about race either.
Right? No, we're not. But that's what my point though is. So I guess what I'm getting at, you're right. It's still going to be a work in progress over the years. But my point is being, what is your purpose? Why are you doing this in the first place? Are you doing it just to say we're doing cross-cultural, cross-racial appointments? Because if that's why you're doing it, then you really don't need to have the conversation. You just need to keep those certain people away from this guy woman or man that you're bringing in. But if you really are trying to address the issue, then I do think, just saying to a church, would y'all accept an African American? And they say yes. Right. And then say, okay, that's not enough.
Right.
There needs to be some. So why are y'all willing to accept? What are y'all hoping to accomplish? What are the goals? What are your goals? Because then we have something to work with and work from as we're going through the stuff that is inevitably going to happen. I would say real quick, and then I could say like I said, you don't want to keep people too long. But a good friend of mine, a colleague, Ernest Frierson, we got ordained together. I found out I was going to Hibben when we were becoming provisional elders, and I said, kind of joking, but again, kind of serious. Those white folks better not say nothing sideways to me, because I'm gonna tell them this, that, and the other. And Ernest said to me, well, then you don't need to go to Hibben. You don't need to go to that church if that's the attitude you're going with. And I was like, what you talking about, man? They can't just talk to me. He said, no, but what they need to be able to do is be themselves. They need to be authentic with you, so then that there could be some real change. If they've got to be superficial and hide how they really feel or what they're thinking, just so that you don't go off, then there's nothing going to be accomplished. There's no goal. You're just going to be there just to say that you were there. But if you want to see some change, then everybody needs to be able to be authentic. And that's why, I joked about coming on here and talk about cross-racial appointments with you. But the fact of the matter is, everything that I've said here tonight, people at Hibben who know me and have listened to what I had to say, they've heard these things.
Right.
And so I'm authentic. I'm true to who I am as a Black person. And I'm also authentic as a full elder United Methodist Church, and more importantly, as a follower of Jesus Christ.
There you have it. Let me get these last comments. Let me start with Brandon. Brandon says, still lots of work to be done. Yeah. Martin said it's a heart issue. Training doesn't help. You got something you want to say?
No,
because I can tell you, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I maybe not so much doesn't help, but I'm not saying training is not always going to be the end all be all.
But
on the flip side as well. I think it's good and bad, nuanced. If that makes sense.
Some training is better than no training. Than just saying, here we go.
I'm gonna flip down because you know how Martin says transactions over transformation. And that's in connection with the training now. The training. And Diana says, amen, and tenderizing. Tenderizing. This has been a dope conversation, but we're about to shut it down. So this is my question. This doesn't have anything to do with theology or cross-racial appointments, but this is how I end all these one-on-one conversations. And if you don't answer this question right, not that there's a right answer. And Diana said, not training, tenderizing. Yeah. And Martin said, love this. But my final question is, give me your top 5.
My top 5.
MCs, son. MCs.
Well, how can that be a right or wrong if they're my top 5?
The problem is if you don't give me 5.
Oh, okay.
See, if you say something like the Bust a Move guy, you out of here.
Well, I wasn't prepared for this, but okay.
That's the whole point. That's the whole point.
Oh man, that's tough. So I'm a little old head here, so number 5, LL Cool J.
You don't have to go in no particular order.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, LL Cool J is
LL.
Top
Okay.
5.
He gets
Rakim.
Okay.
Has to be. Groups or just individuals or
however you want. I'm gonna let you.
All right, Tribe Called. Tribe.
Tribe gets it.
Tribe is up there. Run DMC because that's who I first heard, and then number 5. I go Curtis Blow.
Curtis Blow.
Yeah.
You get the gas face. Oh man, that's outstanding. Outstanding. Hey man, we appreciate everybody for listening. I know this has been a and I do that to kind of break the tension if there was any, because this is a kind of delicate situation, man. But I always said the top 5 is a place where everybody has to sit and think about that. Like, look, the top 5, we all have a top 5.
That's hard, though.
And it changes every week. So we thank everybody for listening. Hey, tune in Thursday. We'll be back for Pull Up and Chop, talking about Toni Morrison's The Origin of the Others. And we appreciate you listening. As always, remember to survive, cultivate joy, and remember to resist and stay dope. Peace.